Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may now be seated.
Good morning from WSFM.
I'm Dallas.
And I'm Peyton.
Did you know today's National High Five Day? Up high. Make sure to give a high five to everyone you meet today. Depending on who you ask, high fives have a historical connection to baseball. A story that dates back to 1977 states Dodgers Dusty Baker and Glenn Burke gave each other a high five in celebration. Baker's home run had just made LA the first team in history to have 4 hitters with at least 30 home runs in a single season. Today, people everywhere use it to mean congratulations or great job. Don't forget about the more commonly used low five, of course, which may have originated back in the 1920s.
Students who leave early for CCP or PLCC should check the attendance office if you have any questions about your sign-out time during testing. We expect you to be in class as much as possible during those 6 days.
There will be a student council meeting after school Wednesday in room 201. There will be no morning meeting due to the special schedule.
Yearbooks are on sale now but will only be available through Wednesday, April 23rd.
A reminder to all students, we will be on a 2-hour delay Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday this week for testing. All students testing must make sure their Chromebooks are charged and ready to go in the morning. Also remember that you will need to reboot and sign in to the secure browser. You do not need to sign into your Google account when testing.
Students taking the test need to arrive at the regular 7:40 a.m. time and report to the rooms that you are assigned to. Check with your teachers if you are not sure. Students being tested should arrive in time for the 9:45 homeroom bell. If you are not testing but cannot get a ride later in the morning, you must ride the regular morning bus. You can stay in the cafeteria for a study hall during testing until classes begin. PLCC, CC+, and CBI students will need to make adjustments accordingly. You will be expected in your regular MHS classes and need to communicate with your teachers if you have a conflict. CBI students should not miss any classes for work. And do not forget to charge those Chromebooks. And next up will be Caleb with the sports.
Good morning, Panther fans. Congratulations to the girls softball team on their win over the weekend. Today, your JV and varsity boys tennis team has a match at home against Chippewa starting at 4:30. Your JV and varsity softball and baseball teams have games against Touchlaw with JV at home and varsity away with all games starting at 5. You can check the MHS Panther Sports Twitter account at Akron MHS Sports to get information on time changes, scores, play highlights, and more. Go Panthers! And now, back over to Peyton and Dallas.
Thanks, Caleb. Happy birthday today to Gwyneth Dieger.
Today's lunch is 3-cheese macaroni, garlic toast, green beans, and choice of fruit. And tomorrow's breakfast will be chocolate chip muffin, choice of fruit, juice, or milk.
Thank you from WSFM. Signing off.
I'm Peyton.
And I'm Dallas.
Have a great day.